Random thoughts. In this video, this is another random thoughts video, and in this video, I'm going to discuss um, the research that is done on Africans, and this came to me as if you watched my videos, you know that at the moment I'm reading Sir Richard Burton's book, First Steps in East Africa: An Exploration of Harar. This is a book that was published in 1850s. And in this book, Richard Burton describes or tells us about his journey from Aden all the way to Zeila, all the way to Harar, to Berbera, and back to Aden. And he was on a mission. He was a spy. He was sent by the British to go collect information about Harar. And the British needed this information because they were so interested in capturing the port of Berbera because they consider that port to be very, very valuable. Now, as he tells the story or the journey, he does mention something that caught my attention. It's a very small mention, it's like a sentence, but then it is a very common piece of information that you get in most of these old documents from before and during colonial time. And it's about the collection of specimens from the land to be sent to London to be studied. Now, there is something called, I think it's called the Royal Geographics or something. It's an organization that was very critical before colonial time and during colonial time. This was, we can say, the huge laboratory of the British. And it used to do a lot of studying about geography, plants and animals and all kinds of things, climate and such things. And Richard Burton mentions that I don't think it is him actually, but Speck, one of the people who were waiting for or was waiting for him at Berbera, and he mentions that he collected a few plants from the land of the Somali as he was traveling, taking data about the altitudes, the climate, such things. They were collecting information, and he collects or he picks a few plants that he sends back to England to be studied because this plant seems like his plants he had not seen. And it was the same thing, animals and things like that. And I remember I've read several of these pre-colonial and colonial documents, and that's very common that the British and I guess the French and the Italians and all these other European powers that came to colonize Africa, even before colonization, the people who were sent here as explorers, they will pick stuff, they will pick plants, they will pick animals, parts of animals, and they will send them to Europe to be studied. And it did not stop with the plants and animals. They actually sent humans. Sometimes there are many places you read in these old documents where they will take human skulls and things like that, and they are taken to Europe to be studied. So for the colonial powers, it was very important to understand not only the land of Africa, but also the people of Africa. And that's why they made it was very important to come here, collect information, and if it was necessary, to pick specimens that are then sent to Europe to be studied for more information. And this is because the Europeans understood very, very early on, and I can say maybe the 16th century, 17th century, during the time of enlightenment, the era of enlightenment as it's called, they realized that knowledge was power. Knowledge was power. And they understood that if you needed to overcome obstacles, then you needed knowledge. You needed to understand whatever you were facing. You needed to understand it very well. And that meant you needed to study it very carefully. And they got into this habit of studying things, studying people, studying societies, studying the environment, which is very valuable. It's not like I'm saying it's a negative thing they are doing. Let's not forget the Europeans are we are the same species, we are the same people basically, even though sometimes of course we get into these fights over resources and things like that and power, but at the end of the day they are humans and we are humans, and often the studies they perform are going to benefit not just them, but they're going to benefit even us. If they are going to get a cure for a certain disease, it's likely that's going to benefit us. If they are going to understand the environment in a certain way and prepare for danger, that's going to benefit all of us. But there is an aspect of it which would be maybe 30% of it, which becomes very dangerous the far back you go, and that is sometimes these studies were done not to benefit humanity, but to benefit a small section of humanity. And um, what we need to realize is that this has not stopped. This has did not stop. Sometimes we are made to think that most of the colonization evil ended in the 1960s and 70s, that now after that Africans are independent and everything is beautiful. Unfortunately, that's not what it is. Colonization goes on, especially when you think of it as the grabbing of power to use it for gain of a certain people who have that power. Then you realize this game has not stopped, and it did not start with the Europeans again. This is another thing we might get lost into, and we think, oh, colonization starts with the Europeans coming to Africa. No, humans have always taken advantage of one another throughout for thousands of years. So this is not even really about race. This is about human nature. Now, and again, to come back to the point of, is there's nothing wrong with people traveling and collecting information, trying to understand. The problem comes when that knowledge that is collected is then used to disadvantage the people who are studied. That becomes very problematic. It's not even ethical, actually, but it happens. It happened before colonial times. It happened during colonial times. It is happening today. Now, I remember I watched somebody who brought out something that I found to be very interesting, and he was discussing the startup culture in Kenya. And Kenya is one of those African countries where there is a lot of money coming in for startups and business entrepreneurship, things like that. Money sent in by different organizations to fund different startups and things like that. And he said, if you look carefully, despite Africa and maybe South Africa and Nigeria receiving a lot of venture capital, as it is called, if you look carefully, you will notice that in the long term, none of the startups that are funded, or very few of them, actually go on to become successful businesses. That very few, the companies you see that are successful businesses, large brands today in Kenya, for example, if you look carefully, these were businesses that were not started in that culture of startup funding, at least not in the conventional way of funding startups. Of course, every business does get capital from somewhere, but most of them started by someone somewhere and they just grew. But if you find startups that were founded by people who heavily relied on these organizations that provide capital funding and acceleration programs and things like that, most of them 5, 6, 10 years down the road, they don't do business. And then he was like, he was providing what you could call a conspiracy theory. And he was of the opinion that most of these startups are not founded to do business. If they were founded to do business, the people who give the money would be very, very careful and will demand and will want to see success. And at this point, they would have given up. But no, that's not the goal. And he said the goal most of the time is data, is information, is to learn, to study the local markets and the people and the society, and to take that data to the West. And that data then is used in other ways that we can't even understand. Most of us can't understand how that data ends up being used. Actually, in today's society, data is the most valuable thing, especially data about human behavior and things like that. This is the most valuable thing you can get, because if you get information about human behavior and things like that, you can make a lot of money. It does not matter what business you enter, you will make a lot of money. So ultimately, data is the real thing. Leave money alone and gold and do these other things. Data is the thing. So I read that part of Speck and Stroyer. I think it's called Stroyer, the guy who died, and Herne. They were visiting Somalia. This is in 1850s. Them collecting these specimens to send to London or to the UK. And I remembered I've seen the same pattern in all these, all or most of these old documents. And I was like, this is interesting. And this is going on. Even today, there are people who are so much interested in collecting information. Now, as I've said, there's nothing wrong with that, because it's going to benefit all of us, or at least much of that can benefit all of us. The problems are two. The first problem, as I said earlier, is when the knowledge that is collected from that research is used to disadvantage the people who are studied. That becomes problematic. The second problem is that those researches or that research is done without the knowledge and understanding of the people who are being studied, or whose environment is being studied. That's problematic. If people come and they tell the local people, look, we want to study you people, we want to study your environment, we want to study your economic activities, we want to study your behavior, and this is the knowledge we are going to collect, and this is how the knowledge is going to be used, and this is how it might benefit you. And these people are made to understand that, and not just the people, but through their representatives who understand what's going on. Then there is no problem really, and these people give consent. I don't think there is any problem with that. The problem becomes, as I've said, this research is done in a way that the people who are being studied don't even know that is going on. And number two, then the knowledge that is gathered, then it's used to disadvantage those people. That's where the problem lies. But uh, people from outside studying societies is something that goes on. Those are my random thoughts.